Hello humans, I'm Batsy with a new episode of the Early Game Farms. This time we are going to make an all-in-one workstation. And as always with this series, we are going to target a specific stage of the game, and the cost of things will be according to that. All of that is obviously under my own judgment and priorities. You might have completely different requirements, and I encourage everyone to tweak the design according to your needs. Of course, these videos wouldn't be possible without the support of my lovely members, so if you want to help the channel, all of my links are in the description below. And if that isn't for you, then consider liking the video and maybe even leaving a comment. That will greatly help the video. For today's episode, I have made an all-in-one workstation where I try to cover the early towards mid-game needs. This one does require going to the Nether, and I recommend building it once you have a decent supply of iron and andesite. The overall cost of the build is reasonably cheap. My focus was to mainly use andesite and iron, since those are easy to get early on. You can always ignore all of the decoration blocks to just build the bare bones of the workstation, but I will get into more detail about that in a moment. One last disclaimer is that I will be showing what each section does, so the humans understand what's going on. But I won't be explaining every little detail from the build. The reason is that there are dozens of ways of building these machines, and the reason why I did something a certain way will simply be because I wanted to do it that way. I invite everyone to tweak the design to your needs and preferences. But for the sake of the video not being 2 hours long, I won't explain every decision. Alright, that was too much babbling. Let's take a look at the actual build. You might notice through the video that some animation look a bit glitchy. The build works regardless. I'm not sure why it's visually bugging out. Also worth noting that because there is a lot going on in here, I added a ton of signs so it's a bit easier to know what is what. It's very simple to operate, but it's also easy to forget where is each chest. So, the first section, this is the most obvious one for sure. Cooking, smelting, haunting, and washing. Those are all of the processes that require an encased fan. Then we have the millstone and the crushing wheels. As the sign shows, the input is the top chest, so we will be adding some raw fish in there. I'm using a chute to force it to be stacks of 16 for various reasons, but if we wait a little bit, you can see how it's slowly filling up. The smelting part does exactly what it says. We throw in the iron, and it should get processed shortly. Of course, it's possible to use various machines at the same time too. The smelting is smelting the iron as expected. The haunting is infesting the stone. The washing is, well, washing all of the crushed iron. We can throw all of the wheat in the millstone, and that will start to give us some flour. Which of course, it's a bit slower because this one works with one unit at a time. I had to quickly fix one detail because apparently you can't open a chest that has a crushing wheel on top. But it works as you would expect. We throw in the iron, and it should quickly give us some crushed iron. This is what I meant by this being quite simple to operate, but also easy to get lost. The way it works is by having a couple of encased fans on each section, which are running at a very low speed to avoid it consuming too many stress units. Those blow into the depots, which will get affected by both of the encased fans since the item will end up in the middle of both blocks. That will speed up the process a bit, which will make it reasonably quick for most purposes. Then we have the millstone stuck in here, with the crushing wheels at its side. On the other side, there are the main funnels for the encased fans, which they do require some filters. If you need to adjust anything from them, you can come here to tweak those. Something worth noting is that the funnels should suck up any item that falls from above, but in case that's not enough, I placed some casings so the items fall in the range of the funnels. If you don't want to build any of the decorations of the schematic, you can simply not put those in the cannon, but I used 2 building blocks that are required for the build to work properly. That's the andesite casings and the smooth stone slabs. Most of the casings are here to block belts or hold items, so they are very necessary. I have also used a lot of campfires to make the building, so if you don't want those, you could not place any campfire on the cannon. If you do that, remember to manually place campfires under the steam engines and the 2 campfires at the very left of the encased fans. That's the only 2 places you're gonna have to manually place them if you don't want the rest. Next, we have a mechanical saw, which I left it exposed, unlike everything else, but there is a good reason for it. There are still 2 barrels in case you want to bulk process something, but it will all depend on what specific recipe you want to use. A mechanical saw in itself will craft anything at random unless you specify what you want. That's why this is out here, so we can tweak it at will. All we need to do is place the filter we're looking to use. Throw the materials in the barrel, and just wait for a bit until it's done. It's not particularly slow, but of course, this works with one item at a time. For the same reason, I have this basin exposed in this corner, so we can adjust the filter with the recipe we desire to be using. I have added 3 different inputs, but of course, not all of them need that many anyway. All we have to do is put the materials of the recipe in each one of those inventories, and the mixer will start working on its own. In this case, we don't need a filter because there is only one possible craft, but it's always good to add one just in case. There is also the question of why 3 inputs and not just one. And the answer is that it won't be reliable for bulk crafting, because it needs to wait for one full stack to go down before it starts with the next. So it's very likely to clog the system in a way that never receives all of the materials. This is also a faster way of feeding the basin anyway. In the middle section, we have the machines to make rose quartz and the casings. All we need to do is follow the signs to put the wood logs in the middle chest and the specific ingot we want to use at the very top chest. The machine goes one by one, so you better go do other things in the meantime, but of course, it's much better than doing it manually. The only thing more annoying than crafting casings is the rose quartz. Thankfully, it uses the same system, placing the sandpaper at the top chest, as the sign says, and the rose quartz in the middle one. This will also work one by one, but there is nothing more annoying than crafting those by hand. The last 2 machines are a little bit more complex, but mostly because they have several functionalities depending on what we are doing. There is a system to craft with a mechanical press and another one with a mixer, but this mixer is a bit more complex than the shapeless crafting we saw before. This press has an input for fluids, 2 different inputs for normal items, and it can also be heated from underneath. There is a lot going on, but that's because there are many different recipes. I thought about adding a tank to store fluids, but the reason against that was that imagine you dump several buckets of lava, and then you suddenly want to craft with water. It's gonna be such a nuisance to remove all of the lava from the tanks that rather not have them to begin with. The drain won't take any more items than it needs, so if you need more fluids, just throw more buckets in the barrel. The same goes for the mixer, since it's the exact same setup. Using it is a whole lot more simple than it feels like. I have the materials to craft the granite, which you can see it requires 2 different inputs and lava too. It doesn't require any heat, but we can pretend it does. So we simply put the coal on the fuel barrel. The blaze gets immediately ignited. Then we want to add the fluids for the recipe, which is lava in our case. That will dump the empty buckets on the output chest. On the other side of the wall, we can see how the system is already filled, so the drain is waiting with a bucket on top until there is room for more. That means you won't have to drain too much in case you want to change the fluid. We want to place a filter in the basin to make sure it's crafting what we want exactly. Then we simply put one type of block in one of the chests and the other on the second one. It's as simple as that. It looks confusing at first, but I think it's nice to have the option to craft most things. The mixer segment works in the same way. One barrel to place the fuel, where the sign shows. Then the materials inside each of the chests. And that gives us some nice brass ingots. There is also an input for the fluids in case the recipe needs that, but just like the press one, use what you need for the recipe. The rest are just extras. And always try to set up the filters unless you know for sure there are no alternative recipes, otherwise it's gonna be doing things at random. But this is pretty much it for the workstation, and I'm quite happy with how it turned out. I always like to have bulk processing options for the basic things. And as I said before, I have made this trying to mostly use iron and andesite, since that is pretty easy to get early on. There are many details that could be improved if we wanted to spend more, but I also tried to prevent schematic bugs as much as possible. By that, I mean to say that some corners might not make sense, but I avoided using certain things that I know for sure will bug out when using the schematic. We're going to be importing this schematic on my SMP to show you all how to set it up, but before we go, I want to clarify one thing. This schematic uses a lot of gearboxes, and that comes with a problem. Gearboxes are sensitive to their alignment and positioning. If we rotate this schematic, things will get messed up. I often read comments saying that certain parts of the farm are running the opposite way, and most of the time, that happens because the schematic was rotated. If you really need to rotate the schematic for whatever reason, do keep in mind that you will need to go through parts of the build to fix the directions. Now yes, I will go to my SMP to farm the materials for this build, see how long that takes me, and I will show you really quickly how to set it up. You will see it's super easy. Fast forward an hour, the cannon is done placing the build, and it's looking fantastic in the back. I can't wait to start building the roads and all of the details I want to add around it. I used some fully enchanted iron gear to farm all of the materials since I'm still playing the server event, but I thought that was still closer to an early game experience. We don't have any farms in here, so I pretty much had to manually farm all of the things, and it took me about an hour to do so. Then, another 10 to 20 minutes between crafting things on the temporary workstation and the cannon itself placing the schematic. I think an hour is a pretty good time, and even with worst gear, it's quite viable to do in a couple of hours. Now we need to set this thing up, which is mostly the missing fluids and the tanks. I would start with the water wheels. They are the first layer of power for the build. Without them, the steam engine won't work. I would start with waterlogging the stairs, so when we add the water on top, it doesn't spill everywhere. You can always leave it as is now, since this already works. Otherwise, you want to place the water against those logs, and that should make it look much cooler. Fantastic! The pumps are already running, so it's time to give them some water too. We want to waterlog all of the bottom layer, including the stairs. With that done, we also want to waterlog the layer where the trapdoors are. This is the most important one. This layer, it's the one that actually feeds the tanks. It can be tricky, but just make sure that all of the pumps and cogwheels are nicely waterlogged. You will see if it's not done properly because water will get removed and not come back. Of course, we can't check if it works yet because the tanks are a mess as always. But before we fix that, we can place the last fluids. The lava will go between the campfires, which will require the server to have the fire tick disabled. Otherwise, don't place wood nearby. The water goes at the far right, and the same as the lava, just adding the top block already works. The last thing we want to do is fix all of those tanks. We can see that the top block isn't connected with the rest, which means that the block below is the one that is bugged out. We just need to place it back until we see that the textures look proper. The goggles should immediately show the boiler status. If not, keep replacing tanks until it does. Everything else seems to be running in the right direction, and everything seems to be working well. I tried to make sure to avoid the things that tend to glitch with schematics, but let me know in the comments if your schematic bugs out in a way I didn't show. You never know what silly things schematics might do. Now I just need to extend a road or something, and this build will be fully done. Originally, I thought of adding it here, but remember what I said before, try to not rotate the schematic, otherwise the gearboxes will get messed up. But this will be it for this episode. Hopefully it's not too complicated to operate, otherwise, the humans are welcome to join my Discord. I have a help channel where you can ask for some guidance if you need it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.